What if the cure you were looking for came not just from machines or medicines, but from something no one expected? In the silence of a pediatric hospital, a golden dog named Max reveals a power that goes beyond science, uniting hearts and transforming lives. Get ready for a journey of hope, love and unexpected miracles, because some stories don't just touch your soul, they change you forever. Find out what makes Max so special and how he became the invisible link that saved an entire hospital. The pediatric wing of Pine Grove Community Hospital had always been too quiet for Emma's liking. Even with the cheerful murals of woodland creatures dancing across the walls and the soft beeping of medical equipment that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, there was something missing, something the 9-year-old couldn't quite name but felt in her bones. Standing at her usual spot by the window, Emma watched as autumn leaves pirouette past the glass, her thin fingers absently tracing the path of her latest 4-line. 6 months had passed since the word leukemia had transformed from something abstract into the center of her universe. 6 months of treatments, of watching her long brown hair fall away, of learning to smile weakly when nurses called her brave. Someone's being a window warrior again, came the gentle voice of Nurse Beverly, her favorite among the staff. The older woman's coral-colored scrubs were decorated with tiny silver stars, a small act of rebellion against the hospital's usual strict dress code. "Your mom called. She'll be here after her shift ends." Emma nodded, not turning away from the window. Below, in the hospital's small courtyard, a family was helping their child into a wheelchair, going home, probably. She remembered what that felt like, back when this was supposed to be temporary. "I heard we're getting a special visitor today," Beverly continued, checking Emma's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Something that might bring a little excitement to our quiet halls." "Another clown?" Emma asked, her voice carrying a weariness beyond her years. The hospital's attempts at entertainment usually fell flat, like colorful band-aids on much deeper wounds. Beverly's eyes twinkled. "Something much better. But it's a surprise." She made a few notes on her tablet. "How about we get you back to bed? Dr. Carter wants to check your numbers before lunch." The mention of Dr. Carter brought a slight frown to Emma's face. The pediatrician was kind enough, but his scientific approach to everything made her feel more like a collection of symptoms than a person. Still, she obediently shuffled back to her bed, her green hospital socks whispering against the linoleum floor. From across the hall came the sound of laughter. Liam was probably watching those funny cat videos again. The 8-year-old with the troubled heart had become something of a constant in Emma's hospital life, his room directly opposite hers. Unlike her, he seemed determined to find joy in their sterile surroundings, even on his worst days. "Emma." Liam's voice carried through both open doors. "Did you hear? Did Nurse Beverly tell you?" "Tell me what?" Emma settled back against her pillows, adjusting the knit beanie that covered her bare head. Liam's excitement was cut short by Beverly's playful warning finger. Now, let's keep it a surprise," Beverly chided gently. "You'll both find out soon enough." The morning crawled by with its usual routine, vitals, medications, a half-hearted attempt at the schoolwork her mother brought weekly. Emma tried to focus on her math problems, but her attention kept drifting to the increasing activity in the hallway. More nurses than usual seemed to be passing by, and there was an undercurrent of excitement in their hushed conversations. Even Dr. Carter appeared more animated when he came for his rounds, his usual serious demeanor softened by something that almost looked like anticipation. "Everything's holding steady, Emma," he announced, reviewing her charts. "How's the fatigue today?" "The same," she replied, though truthfully, she felt more tired than usual. The latest round of chemotherapy had left her feeling like she was moving through water, every movement requiring extra effort. "Dr. Carter." Liam's voice piped up again. "Is it time yet?" The doctor checked his watch, and for once, a small smile cracked through his professional facade. "Actually, yes. I believe our guest has just arrived downstairs." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. The sound of excited whispers and light footsteps grew closer. Emma sat up straighter in her bed, curiosity finally breaking through her usual detachment. Then she heard it, the distinct click of paws against the floor, steady and purposeful. In the doorway appeared a sight that made Emma's heart skip a beat. A golden retriever, his fur the color of sunshine, stood perfectly poised, wearing a blue therapy dog vest. His gentle brown eyes seemed to take in everything at once, and when they met Emma's, something shifted in the quiet hospital room. "Emma," Beverly said softly, "meet Max." The dog's tail began to wag, and without hesitation, he padded over to her bedside. Emma found herself reaching out, her hand trembling slightly. As her fingers sank into Max's soft fur, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a spark of joy, pure and unexpected, warming her from the inside out. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma smiled, really smiled, as tears rolled down her cheeks. From his position by the door, Dr. Carter watched the interaction with scientific curiosity, making mental notes. But even he couldn't deny the tangible change in the room's atmosphere. The silence that had dominated the pediatric wing was broken by the sound of Emma's quiet laughter as Max gently rested his head on her lap, his eyes never leaving her face. Something was beginning, something that would change not just Emma's life, but the entire hospital. And it started with a single wag of a tail and the gentle touch of a paw against a small, brave hand. The following days brought a subtle but unmistakable change to the pediatric wing of Pine Grove Community Hospital. Like ripples in a still pond, Max's presence spread warmth through the sterile corridors. But nowhere was the transformation more evident than in room 214, where Emma waited each morning for the familiar sound of paws on linoleum. "He always comes to me first," she confided to Liam during their shared lunch hour, her hospital tray barely touched but her voice carrying more energy than it had in months. From his wheelchair parked next to her bed, Liam grinned between bites of his sandwich. "That's because you're his favorite," he teased, though there was no jealousy in his voice. "But he knows when each of us needs him most." Emma's mother, Catherine, noticed the change in her daughter during her evening visits. The girl who had retreated into herself now had stories to tell, about Max's gentle way of placing his paw on her hand during blood draws, about how he seemed to know exactly when to lay his head on her lap and when to engage her in play. "He's different, Mom," Emma insisted one evening as Catherine braided the silk scarf around her daughter's bare head. "Sometimes I think he understands everything we say. Everything we feel." Catherine exchanged glances with Nurse Beverly, who was checking Emma's evening medications. They had both witnessed moments that were difficult to explain, like how Max had stationed himself outside Emma's room hours before her fever had spiked the previous night, refusing to move until the medical team arrived. Dr. Carter maintained his professional skepticism, but even he couldn't ignore the improving vital signs in his patients' charts. During his morning rounds, he found himself paying special attention to Max's behavior, noting patterns in the dog's movements that seemed far from random. "The therapy dog program has shown remarkable success," he admitted during a staff meeting, his clinical tone masking his growing curiosity. "Patient morale has improved significantly, and we're seeing better responses to treatment, particularly in the children Max spends the most time with." But it was during the quiet moments that Max's extraordinary nature became most apparent. One afternoon, as Emma dozed through her chemotherapy session, she awoke to find Max unusually alert, his ears perked and eyes fixed on her foreline. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. Instead of leaning into her touch as usual, Max stood up and barked sharply, something he had never done before in the hospital. Nurse Beverly rushed in, immediately noticing the slight swelling around Emma's foresight. "Thank goodness," she murmured, quickly disconnecting the line. "We caught this infiltration early." "How did you know to check, sweetheart?" "I didn't," Emma said, watching as Max settled back down, his mission accomplished. Max knew. The incident sparked more intense observation from Dr. Carter. He began documenting Max's behavior meticulously, noting how the dog would position himself near patients who were about to experience complications, often hours before any medical instruments detected a problem. "It's scientifically improbable," he muttered to himself one evening, reviewing his notes. But the evidence was becoming harder to dismiss. The most compelling proof came during art therapy, when Emma was teaching Max to shake paw with tempera paint on his feet, creating colorful prints on paper. Suddenly, the dog's demeanor changed. He pulled away from their game and trotted urgently to Liam's room, where the boy had been napping. "Max?" Emma called after him, worry creeping into her voice. She pressed her call button, an inexplicable fear gripping her heart. Within minutes, Liam was surrounded by medical staff, his heart rhythm irregular but caught early enough to prevent a crisis. As Dr. Carter stabilized his young patient, he couldn't help but notice Max's position by the bed, alert but calm, as if he had known exactly what was coming and exactly when help would arrive. That evening, Emma sat with Max by her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her fingers traced patterns in his fur as she spoke softly to him. "You're an angel, aren't you?" she whispered. "Sent to watch over us." Max's brown eyes met hers with an intelligence that seemed to transcend his canine nature. He placed his paw gently on her hand, their special signal that everything would be all right. Down the hall, Dr. Carter sat in his office, the day's events weighing heavily on his mind. His medical training told him there had to be a logical explanation for Max's abilities. Perhaps the dog was picking up on subtle changes in body chemistry or minute behavioral shifts that humans couldn't detect. But as he reviewed the growing file of unexplainable incidents, he found himself considering possibilities that went beyond his scientific understanding. The sun set over Pine Grove Community Hospital, casting long shadows through the corridors. In room 214, Emma drifted off to sleep with her hand still resting on Max's fur, while the golden retriever maintained his vigilant watch. Something extraordinary was unfolding within these walls, a mystery that would challenge everything Dr. Carter thought he knew about healing, hope, and the boundaries between the explainable and the miraculous. The morning newspaper sat unopened on Hospital Administrator Richard Walsh's desk, but the headline was still visible: "Local Hospital Faces Budget Cuts." He hadn't touched his coffee either, too preoccupied with the stack of financial reports painting an increasingly grim picture of Pine Grove Community Hospital's future. A gentle knock interrupted his brooding. Dr. Carter stood in the doorway, his usually pristine white coat showing signs of a long night shift. "Do you have a moment, Richard?" "If it's about the budget meeting, I've already. It's about Max," Dr. Carter interjected, closing the door behind him. "I've been collecting data on his impact on patient care. The results are remarkable." Walsh leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched on his face. "David, we're facing a 30% budget cut. The board is talking about eliminating entire programs. I'm not sure a therapy dog, however special, is our priority right now." Down in the pediatric wing, Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by get-well cards from her classmates. Max lay beside her, his head resting on her lap as she read each card aloud. The morning sun streaming through the window caught the silver charm bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother to mark 3 months of successful treatment. "Listen to this one, Max," she giggled, holding up a card covered in glitter. "Dear Emma, my mom says your dog is magic. Is that true?" She scratched behind Max's ears thoughtfully. "I guess news about you is spreading." The hospital's corridors were unusually busy that morning. Local news reporters had been trying to get interviews about the budget cuts, forcing security to increase their patrols. But they couldn't stop the whispers that traveled through the halls, whispers about the extraordinary dog who seemed to predict medical emergencies before they happened. Catherine arrived for her morning visit, her nursing scrubs from the nearby medical center wrinkled from her night shift. She found Emma and Max exactly where she expected them, but today there was someone else in the room, Mrs. Chen, whose daughter Lucy was recovering from surgery 3 doors down. He knew, Mrs. Chen was saying, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Last night, before any of the monitors showed a problem, your Max started scratching at Lucy's door. The nurses checked on her because of him, and they caught the post-operative infection early. She reached out to stroke Max's fur. The doctor said if we'd waited until morning. Catherine watched as Emma beamed with pride, her thin fingers tangled in Max's golden fur. These stories were becoming more frequent, parents and staff sharing moments when Max's intervention had made a crucial difference. "Mom," Emma said after Mrs. Chen left, "I heard Nurse Beverly talking about budget cuts. They won't take Max away, will they?" Before Catherine could answer, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Liam, who had been having a good day and was allowed to walk short distances, collapsed just outside his room. Max was moving before anyone heard the thud, pulling free from Emma's gentle grip and racing to the boy's side. Dr. Carter arrived seconds later, finding Max standing guard over Liam, who was already beginning to regain consciousness. The dog's behavior had given them precious extra seconds of response time, seconds that could make all the difference. "I'm okay," Liam insisted as they helped him back to bed, though his face was pale. "I just got dizzy." But Max knew, didn't he? He always knows. Later that afternoon, Emma sat by her window, watching as news vans gathered in the hospital parking lot. Max lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to track movement in the hallway with alert eyes. "People are starting to understand how special you are," she murmured to him. "Maybe that will help save the hospital." In his office, Dr. Carter was completing his daily observations, adding Liam's incident to his growing file of Max's interventions. His computer screen showed dozens of documented cases, timestamps, witness statements, medical outcomes. The scientific part of his mind still struggled to explain it, but the evidence was becoming undeniable. A soft knock drew his attention. Nurse Beverly stood in his doorway, holding a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a local news website. A video was going viral, shaky phone footage of Max leading emergency staff to a visitor who had suffered a stroke in the hospital cafeteria that morning. The comments section was flooded with similar stories from families whose children had been helped by the extraordinary dog. "The community is talking," Beverly said softly. "They're calling him the guardian angel of Pine Grove." Dr. Carter studied the footage, remembering his earlier conversation with Walsh. Perhaps, he thought, this was exactly what they needed, not just a therapy dog, but a symbol of hope that could rally the community around their struggling hospital. In room 214, Emma had fallen asleep with her latest art project, a painting of Max with angel wings, clutched in her hands. Max remained vigilant at her bedside, his gentle brown eyes moving between his young friend and the door, ready for whatever the night might bring. Outside, the setting sun painted the hospital windows in shades of gold, while in the parking lot, more news vans arrived. The story of Pine Grove's extraordinary dog was spreading, about to transform from local whispers into something much bigger, something that might just be powerful enough to save more than individual patients. The familiar peace of Pine Grove Community Hospital's pediatric wing was disrupted by the constant flash of cameras through the windows. News crews had been camped outside for days, their satellite vans forming a semicircle in the parking lot. Inside, Administrator Walsh stood before a group of reporters in the hospital's small conference room, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes, our therapy dog program has shown remarkable results," he acknowledged, straightening his tie. "But the bigger story here is about the critical role community hospitals play in. Is it true that the dog predicted a cardiac event before it happened?" a reporter interrupted, thrusting her microphone forward. "Multiple sources claim he saved several lives." In room 214, Emma watched the commotion through her window, absent-mindedly braiding colorful friendship bracelets, a skill Lucy from down the hall had taught her. Max lay beside her bed, unusually tense, his ears twitching at every new sound from the corridor. "You don't like all the attention either, do you?" Emma whispered, reaching down to stroke his fur. The dog looked up at her with those knowing eyes, and she felt the familiar warmth of understanding pass between them. "It's okay. We'll protect each other. Dr. Carter's morning rounds had become increasingly complicated. What used to be quiet check-ins were now observed by visiting medical professionals from neighboring hospitals, all eager to witness Max's abilities firsthand. The doctor found himself caught between his scientific curiosity and his protective instinct toward his young patients. "I know you're trying to help," he said quietly to Catherine during one such crowded visit, "but all this attention." Emma's mother adjusted her daughter's foreline with practiced care. "The publicity might save the hospital," she replied, her voice equally low. "But you're right, it's taking a toll on the children." The toll was most visible in Liam, whose room had become something of a showcase since his recent episode. The usually cheerful boy had grown quieter, overwhelmed by the constant stream of visitors asking him to recount his experience. During afternoon therapy, Emma noticed his subdued mood. She convinced Nurse Beverly to let her will her four stand to his room, where she found him listlessly pushing food around his lunch tray. "Want to help me make something?" she asked, holding up her bag of colorful threads. Liam shook his head, but Emma wasn't deterred. "It's for Max. I'm making him a special collar." The mention of Max brightened Liam's eyes slightly. "What kind?" "One that shows he belongs to all of us," Emma explained, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Lucy taught me how to make friendship bracelets, but I think we can make it bigger, strong enough for a collar." As they worked together, their fingers weaving bright threads, Max appeared in the doorway. He padded over to Liam's bed, gently nudging the boy's hand with his nose. For the first time that day, Liam smiled. "See?" Emma said softly. "He always knows when we need him." Later that afternoon, Dr. Carter found himself in Walsh's office again, this time accompanied by Beverly and Catherine, who had taken a break from her shift at the medical center. "The media attention is bringing in donations," Walsh admitted, gesturing to his computer screen. "But it's also bringing scrutiny. The board wants proof, scientific evidence of Max's abilities." "David's been documenting everything," Beverly interjected, nodding toward the thick folder in Dr. Carter's hands. "It's not just about the data," Catherine added, her voice firm. "It's about what's happening to the children. They're not exhibits in a medical study. They're kids fighting for their lives, and Max gives them strength." The discussion was interrupted by urgent footsteps in the hallway. A nurse appeared at the door, slightly out of breath. "Dr. Carter, you need to see this." They hurried to the pediatric wing, where they found Max stationed outside the room of a new patient, a 6-year-old boy admitted that morning for observation. The dog's posture was alert, his eyes fixed on the door. Dr. Carter immediately ordered a complete check of the boy's vitals. Within minutes, they discovered his oxygen levels were dropping dangerously low due to an undiagnosed pneumonia. As the medical team rushed to stabilize the new patient, Emma watched from her doorway, her hands clutching the half-finished collar she and Liam had been working on. She felt a familiar presence beside her and looked down to see Max had returned to her side, his mission accomplished. "You can't be everywhere at once, can you?" she murmured, kneeling beside him despite her fatigue. "That's why you need us too." The evening brought a temporary quiet to the hospital as the news crews packed up for the day. In the pediatric wing, children were settling down for the night, their rooms softly lit by the glow of monitors and night lights. Catherine found Emma asleep in Liam's room, both children surrounded by colored threads, their unfinished project spread across the bed. Max lay between them, his head resting on his paws but his eyes alert, ever watchful. Dr. Carter, passing by on his final rounds, paused at the sight. He thought about the board's demand for proof, about Walsh's budget concerns, about the media circus outside. But here, in this quiet moment, was something that transcended scientific explanation, a connection that was healing hearts in ways no medical textbook could explain. As he turned to leave, he noticed Max's eyes on him, intelligent and knowing. In that moment, Dr. Carter realized that sometimes the most powerful medicine couldn't be measured in data points or clinical trials. Sometimes it came with 4 paws, a golden coat, and the wisdom to know exactly who needed help, and when. The hospital board room felt colder than usual as Administrator Walsh faced the stern faces around the mahogany table. PowerPoint slides flickered on the wall behind him, showing graphs of donation increases since Max's story went viral, but the board members' expressions remained unchanged. While public interest has generated some funding, board chairman Victoria Russell interrupted, her silver-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light, "We need more than viral videos and heartwarming stories. We need concrete evidence that this program is worth saving." Outside in the autumn morning, Catherine stood with a growing group of community members, their breath visible in the crisp air. Handmade signs reading, "Save Pine Grove" and "Keep Max's Magic" dotted the crowd. She checked her phone, still no response from the local businesses she'd contacted about donations. In room 214, Emma sat with her art supplies spread across her bed, working on a new project. The walls of her room had transformed over the past weeks, covered now with drawings of Max helping different children. Each picture told a story: Max leading nurses to Lucy during her infection, Max staying with Liam before his heart episode, Max comforting the new boy with pneumonia. "They want proof of your magic," she told Max, who watched her add color to her latest drawing. "But how do you prove something you feel in your heart?" Dr. Carter stood in his office, surrounded by medical journals and research papers about animal-assisted therapy. His documentation of Max's interventions had grown into multiple folders, but he knew the board wanted something more scientific, more measurable. A knock at his door revealed Nurse Beverly, holding a tablet. "The board's here for their observation day," she said, her usually cheerful face tight with concern. "They're starting their rounds in pediatrics." The news traveled quickly through the children's wing. Liam, who had been teaching Max a new trick involving his favorite toy dinosaur, quickly cleaned up his room. Lucy, finally strong enough to walk short distances, returned to her bed despite her protests about missing physical therapy. "Just act natural," Catherine advised the children as she helped Emma straighten her room. "Show them the real Max, not what they want to see." The board members moved through the wing like a solemn procession, led by Chairman Russell. They carried tablets and notepads, documenting everything with clinical detachment. Dr. Carter walked with them, explaining Max's impact on patient care, but their questions focused on metrics and measurements. "How do you quantify the dog's predictive accuracy?" Russell asked, making notes. "What's the cost-benefit analysis of maintaining this program versus traditional monitoring equipment?" The morning dragged on, with Max being observed like a specimen under a microscope. The children watched with growing unease as their friend was subjected to various tests and scenarios. Emma could see the tension in Max's body, though he remained dutiful and gentle as always. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the board members huddled near the nurse's station, reviewing their notes, Max suddenly lifted his head. Without warning, he trotted purposefully toward the elevator at the end of the hall. The board members watched, puzzled, as Dr. Carter and Nurse Beverly quickly followed. The elevator opened on the first floor, and Max led them to the hospital's physical therapy room. There, they found an elderly patient who had fallen between exercise equipment, out of view of the security cameras. The man had been there for almost 10 minutes, unable to reach the call button. "I didn't even have time to be scared," the man later told the gathering crowd of staff and board members. "This beautiful dog just appeared, like an angel, and then help was right behind him." Chairman Russell stood slightly apart from the group, her tablet forgotten at her side. For the first time, her professional facade showed cracks of emotion. Back in the pediatric wing, Emma worked on finishing Max's special collar with Liam and Lucy, who had sneaked back to Emma's room during the excitement. Their fingers wove together threads of blue for trust, gold for hope, and white for healing. "Do you think they'll understand now?" Liam asked, carefully knotting another strand. Emma watched as Max returned to them, proudly accepting pets and praise from the children. "Sometimes," she said, remembering something her mother once told her, "your heart has to see before your eyes can." That evening, Catherine found Dr. Carter still in his office, adding the day's events to his documentation. The board's discussing further options, he told her, running a tired hand through his hair. Russell seemed affected by what she saw. Numbers don't always tell the whole story, Catherine replied, thinking of the community members still gathered outside with their signs, of the local news covering their vigil, of the growing stack of letters from families whose lives Max had touched. In room 214, Emma had finally fallen asleep, her latest drawing clutched in her hands. It showed the hospital as she saw it, not a place of cold statistics and budget meetings, but a place where magic happened every day, where hope wore a golden coat and padded on four paws through the halls, touching lives in ways that no spreadsheet could capture. Max lay beside her bed, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the monitors. On Emma's bedside table, the nearly finished collar caught the moonlight, its woven patterns telling stories of love, courage, and the kind of healing that happens when hearts open to possibilities that minds can't explain. The Pine Grove Diner had never been so crowded. Every surface was covered with flyers featuring Max's gentle face and the words, "Save Our Hospital," in bold letters. Local business owners, parents, and hospital staff packed the booths and counter seats, while Catherine stood at the front, her nursing scrubs wrinkled from her night shift. "We've started an online fundraising campaign," she explained, her voice tired but determined. "But we need more than just money. We need to show the board that Max's program is essential to our community." In the hospital, Emma watched through her window as more people gathered outside, holding signs and sharing stories. The crowd had grown each day, and now included former patients, their families, and even strangers touched by Max's story. "Look how many people love you," she whispered to Max, who sat beside her, his head tilted at the sight below. The dog's schedule had become increasingly demanding as the board required more documentation of his abilities. Emma had noticed his eyes looking more tired lately, his movements a little slower. Liam wheeled himself into her room, clutching a stack of letters. "More mail for Max," he announced, his face brightening despite his fatigue from his latest treatment. "People from all over are writing to tell their stories." Dr. Carter had been reading these letters too, adding them to his growing file of evidence. But today, his attention was on Max's own signs of strain. The dog had been working longer hours, constantly monitored and tested, while still maintaining his vigilant watch over the children. "He needs rest," Dr. Carter told Administrator Walsh during their morning meeting. "We can't risk burning him out." "The board wants round-the-clock observation," Walsh replied, though his voice carried a note of concern. "They're voting on the budget next week." The pressure wasn't just affecting Max. Emma had noticed how Lucy stayed in her room more often, overwhelmed by the constant visitors. How Liam's hands shook slightly when people asked him to retell his story. How the younger children cried more easily when cameras appeared in their doorways. During afternoon therapy, Emma sat with Lucy and Liam in the playroom, working on Max's collar. The project had become a symbol of their resistance to the chaos around them. Each child in the ward had contributed something, a special bead, a particular color of thread, a tiny charm. "Remember when it was quiet here?" Lucy asked, carefully weaving in a strand of purple thread. "When Max could just be Max." Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. A local TV crew had managed to slip past security, cameras rolling as they approached the playroom. Max immediately positioned himself between the children and the door, his posture protective rather than threatening. "Please," the reporter called out, "we just want to see the miracle dog in action." The children huddled together, overwhelmed by the intrusion, until Nurse Beverly and security arrived to escort the crew out. But the damage was done. Liam's heart rate had elevated, and Lucy was fighting tears. That evening, Catherine found Emma sitting alone in her room, her art supplies untouched. "Honey. What's wrong?" "They're hurting him, Mom," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Not with hands or meanness, but with all their watching and wanting. He's so tired, but he won't stop helping because that's who he is." Catherine sat on the bed beside her daughter, noting how the usually vibrant girl seemed drained. The stress of being at the center of this storm was taking its toll on all of them. In his office, Dr. Carter reviewed security footage from the day's incident, preparing his report for the board. On his screen, he watched Max's reaction to the TV crew, not aggression, but pure protection. The dog had placed himself precisely where he needed to be, thinking only of the children's well-being. A knock at his door revealed Chairman Russell, her usual businesslike demeanor softened slightly by concern. "I saw what happened today," she said, closing the door behind her. "Perhaps we need to reconsider our approach." "These aren't lab conditions we're dealing with," Dr. Carter replied, gesturing to his wall of documentation. "This is about children fighting for their lives, and a dog who somehow knows exactly what they need. We're measuring something that might not be meant to be measured." Later that night, after the hospital had quieted, Emma sneaked out of bed. With Max by her side, she made her way to the playroom, where the unfinished collar lay in its special box. Working by moonlight, she added one final touch, a small heart-shaped charm she'd been saving. "You don't have to prove anything," she told Max as he rested his head in her lap. "You've already changed everything." Outside her window, the community vigil continued. People had brought blankets and thermoses of coffee, determined to stay through the night. Their flashlights and candles created a constellation of hope in the darkness. In the pediatric wing, other children were awake too, drawn to their windows by the lights below. Lucy hugged her stuffed unicorn, watching the scene with wide eyes. Liam sat in his wheelchair, his dinosaur toy forgotten in his lap. Each of them felt the weight of what was at stake, not just a program or a budget, but the heart of their hospital itself. Max moved from room to room, checking on each child as he always did, despite his exhaustion. His gentle presence brought comfort, just as it had from the first day. But now, there was something else in his eyes, a weariness that mirrored the tired faces of the children he watched over. The night deepened, and still the lights blazed outside, a testament to a community united in purpose. In room 214, Emma finally slept, her hand resting on Max's fur. On her bedside table, the nearly completed collar caught the glow of the vigil lights, its woven threads telling a story of love, protection, and the kind of magic that no amount of testing could ever fully explain. The board meeting was interrupted by an unexpected sound, singing. Chairman Russell paused mid-sentence as the melody drifted through the hospital's open windows. Outside, hundreds of people had gathered, their voices rising in a spontaneous chorus of "This Little Light of Mine." Leading the crowd was Mr. Rodriguez, the owner of Pine Grove Diner, who had closed his restaurant for the first time in 20 years to be there. Beside him stood teachers from the local elementary school, their students holding handmade posters decorated with golden retrievers wearing angel wings. "As I was saying," Russell continued, trying to maintain her focus, "the financial projections, the signing grew louder, joined by hospital staff ending their shifts and families of current patients. Catherine stood among them, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from local business owners pledging support. Up in the pediatric wing, Emma sat in her art therapy session, but today was different. The hospital's small art room had been transformed into a makeshift studio, with cameras from the local news station set up carefully in one corner. After days of discussion, Dr. Carter had finally agreed to a controlled media event, one that would let the children tell their own stories, in their own ways. "Remember," Nurse Beverly reminded the camera crew, "any sign of distress from the children, and we stop immediately." Emma took a deep breath, looking down at her collection of drawings. Each one captured a moment when Max had touched someone's life, the night he'd warned them about Lucy's infection, the morning he'd found the fallen man in physical therapy, the countless times he'd simply known when someone needed comfort. "Ready, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, standing supportively behind her daughter's chair. Emma nodded, her fingers finding comfort in Max's fur as he sat beside her. The dog's eyes remained alert despite his obvious fatigue from the constant observations and tests. "My name is Emma," she began, her voice small but clear, and this is my friend Max. He's not just a therapy dog. He's our guardian angel." As Emma shared her story, other children began wheeling themselves into the art room. Liam arrived with his mother, clutching his favorite dinosaur toy. Lucy came with her collection of thank you cards from former patients. One by one, they added their voices to Emma's. In the boardroom, Administrator Walsh's phone lit up with notifications. The live stream of the children's stories was going viral, with viewers and donations pouring in from across the country. "You need to see this," he interrupted, turning his tablet toward the board members. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital windows as Emma finished presenting her artwork. The news crew packed up their equipment, visibly moved by the children's testimonies. But the day wasn't over yet. Max suddenly lifted his head, his ears perked in a way that Dr. Carter had learned to recognize. The dog rose smoothly from Emma's side, his exhaustion forgotten as he moved with purpose toward the door. "Something's wrong," Emma said, already reaching for her wheelchair. Dr. Carter followed Max through the corridors, with Nurse Beverly close behind. They found themselves at the entrance to the hospital's east stairwell, where a young mother sat slumped against the wall, her newborn clutched to her chest. "Postpartum hemorrhage, Dr. Carter diagnosed quickly, calling for an emergency team. "How did she get here without being seen?" "I got lost," the woman whispered as help arrived. "I was just discharged, started feeling dizzy, couldn't find my way back to maternity." Chairman Russell had followed the commotion and now stood watching as the medical team stabilized the young mother. Her eyes moved from Max, still standing vigilant nearby, to the gathering crowd of children in their wheelchairs and hospital gowns. Emma wheeled herself forward, holding out one of her drawings. It showed Max leading helpers to people in need, with golden lines connecting everyone like a web of light. "This is what he does," she said simply. "He connects us. He shows us how to help each other." That evening, as the sun set over Pine Grove Community Hospital, the board reconvened. The room felt different now, less like a place of cold numbers and more like part of the living, breathing community it served. Catherine found Emma in the art room later, surrounded by her drawings and the unfinished collar she and her friends had been working on. Max lay beside her, finally allowing himself to rest. "Mom," Emma said, adding the final threads to the collar, "I think they're starting to understand." Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Someone had brought speakers, and gentle music mixed with the evening air. People passed out cups of hot chocolate and shared stories of their own experiences with the hospital. Dr. Carter stood at his office window, watching the scene below. His desk was covered with documentation of Max's abilities, charts, graphs, incident reports. But now there was something new, a stack of children's artwork, each piece telling a story that numbers could never capture. In the pediatric wing, Liam and Lucy had joined Emma in her room. Together, they watched the twinkling lights of phones and candles in the gathering darkness below. The collar lay finished between them, each thread and charm representing a piece of their shared story. "Do you think it worked?" Liam asked, his dinosaur toy clutched close. "Telling our stories?" Emma looked at Max, who had raised his head to meet her gaze with those knowing eyes. In that moment, she felt something shift, like stars aligning, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. "I think," she said softly, reaching for the completed collar, "this is just the beginning of our story." The morning dawned with an unusual buzz in Pine Grove Community Hospital. Yesterday's events had transformed the atmosphere, leaving an electric sense of anticipation in the air. The young mother whose life Max had saved was recovering well in the maternity ward, and her story had spread through local news channels overnight. Emma woke to find a small mountain of letters on her bedside table, many addressed simply to Max's friend. News of the children's art presentation had sparked an outpouring of support from across the country. Max lay in his usual spot beside her bed, his eyes following Nurse Beverly as she sorted through the mail. "People are sending donations with their letters," Beverly explained, holding up several envelopes. Some are even offering to start therapy dog programs at their own hospitals. Down the hall, Dr. Carter stood in his office, facing Chairman Russell. The morning light cast long shadows across his collection of documentation, now supplemented by yesterday's video footage and a fresh stack of donation pledges. The numbers are impressive, Russell admitted, reviewing the latest financial reports. But it's not just about the money anymore, is it? Before Dr. Carter could respond, a familiar sound caught their attention. Max's warning bark echoed through the corridor, sending medical staff rushing toward the source. They found Liam in his room, his breathing labored, his morning medications having triggered an unexpected reaction. "I'm okay," Liam insisted once the crisis had passed, his color slowly returning. "Max knew before I did. He always knows." Emma watched from her doorway as Chairman Russell observed the scene, noting how the woman's usual stern expression had softened. The board member lingered longer than necessary, watching Max return to his routine of checking on each child in the wing. Later that morning, Catherine arrived to find Emma surrounded by her friends, all working on thank you cards for their supporters. Lucy, stronger now, sat cross-legged on Emma's bed, carefully decorating each card with tiny painted paw prints. Liam, recovered from his morning scare, added his own drawings of dinosaurs wearing hospital gowns. "Mom, listen to this one," Emma called out, holding up a letter. "Dear Max and friends, my daughter was afraid of hospitals until she saw your story. Now she says she's not scared because angels have paws too." Catherine smiled, though her eyes held worry. The board's final vote was scheduled for tomorrow, and despite the overwhelming support, nothing was certain. She watched as Max moved between the children, offering comfort here, playful nudges there, somehow knowing exactly what each one needed. In the hospital cafeteria, Administrator Walsh sat with local business owners who had gathered to discuss long-term support plans. Mr. Rodriguez from the diner had brought fresh muffins, and the owner of Pine Grove Bookstore was proposing a children's book about Max. "It's not just about saving one program," Walsh explained, his usual bureaucratic tone giving way to genuine passion. "It's about recognizing what makes a community hospital special." The afternoon brought more visitors, but these were different from the usual reporters and photographers. Former patients began arriving with their families, gathering in the hospital garden visible from the pediatric wing. They carried handmade signs sharing their own stories of healing at Pine Grove. Emma watched from her window as the crowd grew, recognizing faces from her early days in the hospital. "Look, Max," she whispered, pointing to a young boy running and playing despite his prosthetic leg. "That's Tommy. Remember how you used to visit him after his surgeries?" Max's tail wagged gently as they watched more people arrive. The garden became a tapestry of stories: children who had beaten cancer, teenagers who had learned to walk again, parents who had spent countless nights in hospital rooms just like Emma's. Dr. Carter found Chairman Russell standing in the hallway, watching as Emma and her friends continued their thank you card project. The children had turned it into a game, with Max carrying cards between rooms, bringing smiles to tired faces. "You know," Russell said quietly, "I've spent 20 years on hospital boards, always focused on efficiency and bottom lines. But I've never seen anything quite like this." Evening approached, bringing with it an unexpected visitor. The young mother from yesterday's emergency arrived in a wheelchair, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. Max immediately went to her, gently nuzzling her hand. "I had to come say thank you," she told the gathering of children and staff. "Not just to Max, but to all of you. This place, it's more than a hospital. It's a family." As night fell over Pine Grove, Emma sat with Max in the quiet of her room. The completed collar lay in her lap, its woven threads catching the moonlight. Each color, each charm, each carefully tied knot represented a piece of their story, not just hers and Max's, but everyone's. "Tomorrow's the big day," she murmured, running her fingers through his fur. "But no matter what happens, you've already changed us all." In the boardroom, Chairman Russell worked late into the night, her desk illuminated by a single lamp. Spread before her were financial reports and budget proposals, but also children's artwork, letters from the community, and photographs of Max with his young friends. She picked up one of Emma's drawings, the one showing Max as a bridge between people, golden lines connecting heart to heart. In the quiet of the empty hospital, Russell finally understood what she'd been missing in all her years of administrative decisions. Sometimes the most valuable things couldn't be measured in dollars or data. Sometimes they came in the form of a dog's intuition, a child's smile, or a community's unwavering belief in magic. The morning of the board vote arrived with an unexpected autumn storm. Thunder rolled across Pine Grove as rain lashed against the hospital windows, but neither the weather or the early hour deterred the crowd gathering in the parking lot. Under a sea of umbrellas, community members huddled together, waiting. Inside room 214, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat in her window seat, Max's newly finished collar in her lap, watching lightning illuminate the determined faces below. The collar felt warm in her hands, each woven thread carrying the hopes and stories of every child in the pediatric wing. "Something feels different today," she whispered to Max, who sat alert beside her, his eyes fixed on the corridor rather than the window. Emma had learned to trust that look. Max sensed something coming. Dr. Carter arrived earlier than usual, his white coat speckled with rain. He found Administrator Walsh already in his office, reviewing last-minute financial projections before the board meeting. The storms caused some flooding on the north side of town, Walsh mentioned, rubbing his tired eyes. Emergency services are stretched thin. Catherine rushed in, still wearing her scrubs from her night shift at the medical center. "The river's rising," she reported, her hair dripping. "They're evacuating homes near the bank. The main hospital's getting overwhelmed with emergency cases." Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered ominously. Thunder crashed overhead, and for a moment, the hospital held its breath. In the pediatric wing, Emma noticed Max's behavior changing. The dog moved restlessly between rooms, checking on each child with increasing urgency. Liam, who had been watching the storm from his own window, wheeled himself into Emma's room. "He knows something," Liam said, clutching his dinosaur toy. Lucy joined them soon after, drawn by the same unspoken anxiety that seemed to radiate from Max. Chairman Russell arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, her usual professional demeanor somewhat ruffled by the storm. As she made her way to the board room, she paused at the pediatric wing, watching Max's unusual patrol pattern. "He's agitated," Emma explained when she noticed Russell observing. "Last time he acted like this." The lights went out. For a moment, darkness engulfed the hospital. Emergency generators hummed to life, casting everything in a dim, golden glow. Through the darkness came the sound of Max's bark, urgent, insistent. "Power's out across half the city," Walsh announced, hurrying down the corridor with his phone's flashlight. "The storm's knocked out the main grid." Dr. Carter emerged from a patient's room, his face grave. "We need to check all critical equipment. Some of our backup systems are showing strain." Max's barking grew more intense. He ran to Emma's door, then down the hall, then back again, clearly trying to tell them something. "Follow him," Emma urged, her voice carrying a certainty that made even Chairman Russell take notice. "He knows where to go." Dr. Carter and Russell hurried after Max as he led them down to the hospital's basement level. There, they found water seeping under a door, the mechanical room that housed some of the backup generator systems. "The river," Russell breathed, understanding dawning on her face. "If it reaches the electrical systems." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. As the board meeting time came and went, hospital staff and community members formed a human chain, passing sandbags and equipment, working together to protect the hospital's critical infrastructure. Children from the pediatric wing used their tablets and phones to coordinate with emergency services, relaying information about nearby families needing evacuation. Emma watched it all from her window, Max now back at her side after his crucial warning. Below, she could see Chairman Russell working alongside Mr. Rodriguez from the diner and Lucy's father, their business suits and casual clothes equally soaked as they fought to save the hospital. "It's like you're drawing," Liam observed, pointing to the scene. "Everyone connected, helping each other." Catherine appeared in the doorway, her scrubs muddy from helping with the flood response. "The board members have seen something today that no financial report could ever show them," she said, smiling despite her exhaustion. As the day wore on, the storm began to weaken. Sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the parking lot where board members and local residents shared coffee from Mr. Rodriguez's food truck, discussing ways to improve the hospital's emergency readiness. Chairman Russell found Emma in the art room, where she and her friends had set up a rest station for the volunteers, complete with children's artwork and thank you cards. "I think," Russell said, kneeling to pet Max, "we've all been asking the wrong questions. It was never about proving Max's abilities or measuring the program's worth." "What was it about?" Emma asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "It was about this," Russell gestured to the scene around them, volunteers helping each other, children offering encouragement, Max moving from person to person offering comfort to the tired workers. It was about community. About connection. About the kind of healing that doesn't show up on any chart. As evening approached, the hospital hummed with a different kind of energy. The power had been restored, the flood waters were receding, and throughout the building, people shared stories of the day's events. Max's early warning had prevented potentially catastrophic damage to the hospital's systems, but more than that, the crisis had revealed the true heart of Pine Grove Community Hospital. Emma sat in her bed, physically tired but spiritually lifted by all she had witnessed. Max lay beside her, finally resting after his heroic day. Around his neck, he wore the completed collar, a symbol not just of the children's love, but of an entire community's unity and strength. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to him. "You knew we needed something to bring everyone together. To make them see." Max's eyes met hers with that familiar wisdom, and Emma understood that sometimes the greatest miracles aren't the dramatic rescues or unexplainable predictions. Sometimes they're found in the simple act of people coming together, proving that the real magic of healing lies in the connections we forge when faced with challenges bigger than ourselves. The morning after the flood brought with it a transformed Pine Grove Community Hospital. Mud-stained footprints tracked through hallways where board members in expensive suits had once walked, and makeshift sleeping bags still dotted the cafeteria where volunteers had spent the night. But something else had changed too, something less visible but far more profound. Emma noticed it first when she woke to find Chairman Russell asleep in the chair beside her bed, still wearing her mud-splattered blazer from yesterday. Max lay at the woman's feet, as if he'd been watching over her rest just as he did for the children. "She stayed all night," Nurse Beverly whispered as she came in for morning rounds. "Helped us monitor the backup generators after everyone else went home." Through her window, Emma could see community members already returning, armed with mops and cleaning supplies. Mr. Rodriguez's food truck was back in its spot, serving breakfast to the cleanup crews. Local news crews that had once fought for scandal now pitched in alongside hospital staff, their cameras forgotten. Dr. Carter found Catherine in his office, organizing the scattered papers that had been hastily moved during the flood threat. Among the medical charts and documentation were dozens of new letters that had arrived overnight, stories from other hospitals inspired by Max's example. "The board meeting's been rescheduled for noon," Catherine mentioned, holding up a water-stained agenda. "Though after yesterday, it feels more like a formality." Chairman Russell stirred in Emma's room, blinking in the morning light. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, but then her eyes fell on Max, and she smiled, a real smile that erased years of boardroom severity from her face. "I had the most remarkable dream," she said, accepting a cup of coffee from Beverly. "I dreamed I saw golden threads connecting everyone in the hospital, just like in your drawing, Emma. And at the center was Max, weaving new threads wherever they were needed." Emma reached for her latest sketch pad, its pages slightly wrinkled from yesterday's humidity. Like this? She asked, showing a drawing she'd worked on during the night. It showed the scene from yesterday, board members and local residents passing sandbags, children coordinating rescue efforts, Max leading people to where they were needed most. Exactly like that, Russell nodded, studying the image. You know, in all my years overseeing hospitals, I've never understood what makes some of them special. Why patients drive past bigger, newer facilities to come to places like Pine Grove. Yesterday showed me. The morning progressed with a strange mix of routine and revolution. Regular treatments continued in the pediatric wing, but now board members helped push wheelchairs and carry meal trays. Lucy's father, still in his business suit from yesterday, taught her physical therapy class, making all the children laugh with his exaggerated exercises. Liam had a checkup scheduled, but instead of just Dr. Carter, 3 other board members attended, watching intently as Max anticipated the boy's nervous reaction to needles, providing comfort before anxiety could trigger his heart condition. It's not just about predicting medical emergencies, Dr. Carter explained as they left Liam's room. It's about preventing them. About understanding that healing isn't just a physical process. At 11:30, Administrator Walsh began heading to the boardroom, only to find Chairman Russell already there, putting the final touches on a presentation. I took the liberty of revising our agenda, she said, her laptop showing not budget spreadsheets, but photos from yesterday's crisis. I think it's time we discussed the future of Pine Grove from a different perspective. The board members filed in, many still wearing borrowed scrubs or casual clothes from the cleanup efforts. Emma watched from her wheelchair in the hallway, Max beside her, as Catherine and Dr. Carter joined them. Through the open door, she could hear Russell's voice, strong and certain. Yesterday, we came here to evaluate a program based on metrics and financial projections. Instead, we witnessed something extraordinary, not just a dog's remarkable abilities, but a community's heart. Emma didn't need to hear more. She wheeled herself back to the pediatric wing, where Liam and Lucy waited anxiously. Together, they worked on a new art project, a massive thank you card for everyone who had helped during the crisis. Around Max's neck, the special collar seemed to glow in the midday sun, each thread and charm reflecting the light like the connections in Emma's drawings. The dog moved between his young friends, offering comfort and companionship as they waited for news. Just before 1 o'clock, the sound of applause echoed through the hospital corridors. Emma looked up from her artwork to see Catherine in the doorway, tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. "Mom?" Emma asked, though she could already feel the answer in her heart. The board voted unanimously, Catherine announced, her voice thick with emotion. Not just to save the therapy dog program, they've committed to expanding it. Chairman Russell is establishing a foundation to help other hospitals create similar programs. The celebration that followed wasn't like the ones Emma had seen on TV, with champagne and formal speeches. Instead, it was perfectly Pine Grove, children in hospital gowns sharing cookies baked by Mr. Rodriguez, board members still in muddy clothes exchanging hugs with staff, and Max moving through it all, somehow knowing exactly who needed him most in each moment. As evening approached, Emma sat in her favorite window seat, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors of hope. Max lay beside her, his head in her lap, both of them tired but content. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she whispered to him. "That sometimes it takes a storm to show people what really matters." Max's gentle brown eyes met hers, full of that wisdom that went beyond words. Outside, the hospital parking lot was finally clearing, but something remained, an invisible web of connections, stronger than any flood, more powerful than any budget, healing hearts in ways that no spreadsheet could ever measure. 2 weeks after the flood, Pine Grove Community Hospital hummed with a new kind of energy. Construction crews worked on renovating the first floor, creating a dedicated space for the expanded therapy dog program. Through the noise of progress, Max led a golden retriever puppy named Luna through the pediatric wing, showing her the routes between rooms just as he'd shown so many others the way to healing. She's learning from the best, Emma told Dr. Carter during her morning checkup. From her bed, she could see Luna mimicking Max's gentle approach to each door, his careful way of greeting new patients. But more importantly, she could see something else in her latest blood tests, numbers that made Dr. Carter smile for the first time in months. "The treatment's working better than we expected," he explained to Catherine, who had taken a break from her nursing shift to be there. "Emma's response rates have improved significantly since I stopped being afraid," Emma finished for him, exchanging a knowing look with Max. The dog had returned to her side, leaving Luna to practice with Nurse Beverly. The hospital's transformation extended beyond its physical spaces. Chairman Russell, now a regular visitor to the pediatric wing, had set up an office in what used to be a storage room. Today, she sat surrounded by applications from other hospitals eager to start their own therapy dog programs. "We've received inquiries from across the country," she told Administrator Walsh as they walked the halls. "But we want to do this right. Each program needs to understand that it's not just about having dogs in the hospital, it's about building connections." In the newly renovated playroom, Liam was having his best day yet. His latest cardiac tests showed improvement, and Dr. Carter had cleared him for more physical activity. He sat on a therapy mat, teaching Luna the same dinosaur game he'd created with Max months ago. "Watch this," he called to Lucy, who was doing her physical therapy nearby. "She's almost got it." The puppy fumbled with the toy dinosaur, not quite managing Max's graceful retrieve, but her enthusiasm brought laughter from both children. Lucy, now strong enough to walk without assistance, had become something of a mentor to new patients. Emma watched from the doorway as her friend showed a recently admitted girl how to make friendship bracelets, explaining how each color held a special meaning. "The blue is for trust," Lucy explained, her fingers steady as she wove the threads. "And the gold is for hope, like Max's fur in the sunshine." The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, the young mother whose life Max had saved during the flood. She carried her baby, now a month old, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with tiny paw prints. "We named him Maxwell," she told the gathering of children and staff, tears in her eyes. "To remind us that miracles come in unexpected forms." Catherine found Emma in the art room later, working on a special project. The walls were now covered with not just Emma's drawings, but artwork from children at other hospitals, sent in response to their story. Each piece showed a different interpretation of healing, of hope, of the magic that happened when hearts connected. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, noting the determined look on her daughter's face. Emma held up a children's book dummy, rough sketches and handwritten text telling the story of a special dog who changed a hospital. "Chairman Russell thinks we should share our story," she explained. "To help other kids understand that hospitals don't have to be scary places." As evening approached, Dr. Carter sat in his office, reviewing the data from the expanded therapy dog program's first 2 weeks. The numbers were impressive: reduced anxiety levels, improved response to treatments, faster recovery times. But more compelling were the stories captured in his daily notes: a child laughing for the first time in months, a teenager finding courage to take their first steps after surgery, a parent finally allowing themselves to hope. Max made his nightly rounds, Luna following attentively at his heels. They stopped in each room, checking on Liam, who was reading a story about dinosaurs becoming doctors, visiting Lucy, who was practicing her walking exercises even after hours, and finally returning to Emma, who waited with a new charm for Luna's training collar. "It's a star," Emma explained as she fastened it carefully. "Because you're learning to be a light in the darkness, just like Max." Through the window, the lights of Pine Grove twinkled under a clear night sky. The flood's damage had been repaired, but its lesson remained, woven into the hospital's new identity. On the bulletin board in the nurses' station, a quote had been added beneath the duty roster: "Healing happens in the connections we create." In her room, Emma added the finishing touches to her book's final illustration, a scene showing Max and Luna leading a parade of therapy dogs through hospital corridors, golden threads connecting everyone they passed. But unlike her earlier drawings, these threads extended beyond the hospital walls, reaching out into the community and beyond, suggesting that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. "Do you think we'll ever know how you do it?" she asked Max softly, watching as he helped Luna settle into her new bed nearby. "How you know exactly who needs you and when?" Max's wise eyes met hers, and Emma smiled, understanding that some kinds of magic didn't need explanation. They only needed to be believed in, nurtured, and shared with others who were ready to see the extraordinary in the everyday moments of healing. The seasons had turned at Pine Grove Community Hospital, bringing spring blossoms to the garden where once autumn leaves had fallen. 1 year had passed since Max first padded through these halls, changing everything with each gentle paw step. Now, on a bright morning filled with promise, Emma stood before the mirror in her hospital room, hardly recognizing the reflection that smiled back at her. Her hair had begun to grow back, soft brown curls catching the sunlight that streamed through her window. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that had changed, there was a strength in her eyes, a confidence in her stance that spoke of battles fought and won. "Ready for the big day?" Catherine asked, appearing in the doorway with a special outfit, not a hospital gown, but a pretty blue dress that matched the spring sky. Today marked not just Emma's final treatment, but also the official opening of the Pine Grove Animal Assisted Therapy Center. The renovated first floor had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space where Max and Luna, now fully trained, would help train other therapy dogs and their handlers. "Max knew all along, didn't he?" Emma said, watching the dog who had changed her life. "He knew I'd make it." In the new center's waiting area, familiar faces gathered. Liam, now strong enough for school and sports, wore his favorite dinosaur t-shirt beneath a neat blazer. His heart condition would always require monitoring, but he had become living proof of the program's success. Lucy, fully recovered, helped arrange chairs alongside her father, who had joined the hospital's board of directors. Dr. Carter stood with Chairman Russell, both watching as Max conducted his morning rounds with characteristic dignity. Luna bounced alongside him, her own therapy dog vest pristine, her training collar adorned with charms that told stories of lives touched and hearts healed. "The latest research paper has been accepted for publication," Dr. Carter mentioned, holding up his tablet. "The medical community is finally beginning to understand what we learned here, that healing involves more than medicine." Russell nodded, remembering her own transformation from skeptic to believer. 6 new hospitals have launched similar programs using our model, she added. "But they all know there will never be another Max." The ceremony began with Emma's book release, The Angel with Golden Fur, published by Pine Grove Press and illustrated with her own artwork. As she read the story aloud to the gathered crowd, her voice strong and clear, Max sat beside her, just as he had through every treatment, every difficult day, every moment of doubt and triumph. "Once there was a very special dog," she read, turning pages filled with her drawings. "He could see with his heart what others could only see with their eyes." In the audience, the young mother whose life Max had saved held baby Maxwell, now crawling and babbling. Former patients filled the rows, many wearing t-shirts with Emma's artwork printed on them. Mr. Rodriguez had closed the diner for the morning, bringing his famous muffins for everyone. "The real magic," Emma continued reading, her voice catching slightly, "wasn't in knowing when something was wrong. It was in showing us how to make things right, together." After the reading, as people mingled and celebrated, Emma found a quiet moment in her old room. Soon, another child would make this space their temporary home, facing their own battles. But they would have something she hadn't had at first, hope, wrapped in fur and walking on 4 paws. "I'll miss this view," she told Max, looking out at the garden where young therapy dogs now trained. "But you'll take good care of everyone, won't you?" Max's response was to lead her to his special spot beside her bed, where they had spent so many hours together. From her bag, Emma pulled out one last gift, a new charm for his collar, a tiny silver bell that chimed softly with his movements. "So they'll always hear hope coming," she whispered, fastening it carefully. The day wound down with a surprising announcement from Dr. Carter and the board. The hospital would establish a scholarship fund, named after Max, to help children interested in animal-assisted therapy pursue their dreams. Emma would be its first recipient, her experiences and artwork already inspiring others to explore the healing power of the human-animal bond. As sunset painted the sky in familiar golds and pinks, Emma took one last walk through the pediatric wing with Max. Luna had already settled in with a new patient, instinctively knowing, just as her mentor had taught her, exactly who needed her most. They passed the art room, where Emma's original drawings still hung alongside new ones from current patients. They visited the playroom, where the dinosaur toy that had helped Liam through his hardest days sat waiting for the next child who would need its comfort. They stopped by the nurse's station, where Beverly wiped away tears while trying to maintain her professional composure. Finally, they reached the hospital entrance, where Catherine waited with their car. Emma knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around him in a gentle hug. "This isn't goodbye," she whispered into his fur. "It's just a new chapter." Max's wise eyes met hers one last time in that special way of his, and Emma knew with absolute certainty that while she was leaving the hospital, she would never leave the magic they had created together. It lived on in Luna's growing confidence, in the new therapy dogs arriving each month, in the children finding strength they never knew they had. As Emma walked out of Pine Grove Community Hospital, no longer a patient but forever changed, she heard Max's bell chime softly behind her. The sound echoed through the corridors like hope itself, a promise that some angels have paws, some heroes have fur, and some kinds of magic never end, they just multiply, touching heart after heart, healing soul after soul, creating connections that last a lifetime. In the garden, the spring flowers bloomed bright and strong, much like the young girl who had once watched fall leaves dance past her window. And somewhere in the pediatric wing, a dog with golden fur and knowing eyes began his evening rounds, carrying forward a legacy of love that would continue to change lives, one gentle paw step at a time.